chances are this thing's never going back to zero again. This will just run away off into the distance, and it's only the ego and lack of humility stopping you from just buying and getting back on the train. It's a very predictable path. The more you learn about Bitcoin, the more you know, the more you buy. You don't have to be all in, is what I'd say. You can take a part of it and put that in.
Would you believe me if I told you our entire world is on the brink of a transformation? One where an old system is crumbling and a new one is emerging. Today, we're diving deep into an unsettling yet exciting shift in the global financial landscape. One that's changing the way billionaires, institutions, and everyday investors think about risk and wealth. What happens when icons like Larry Fink from BlackRock and others like him signal that Bitcoin is no longer just a speculative asset, but a necessity in any serious portfolio? Is it riskier now not to own Bitcoin? Well, this actually already happened. In fact, it happened almost a year ago. BlackRock has since released papers detailing that the ideal allocation to Bitcoin is 85 to 110%. I know. Investors far and wide are in the process of waking up to this reality that Bitcoin is just better money, and it's primed to make another big move. In this episode, we'll uncover the massive shift in thinking that's pushing Bitcoin from a fringe investment to the cornerstone of financial security. We'll explore how the Overton window of Bitcoin is shifting, from being seen as a volatile gamble to a safe haven asset, protecting investors from counterparty risk inherent with traditional investments. Why are some of the world's wealthiest people putting so much of their capital into Bitcoin? Is there a logical endgame that leads them to believe that this is the only path forward? If you reside solely in the traditional finance system, are you prepared for a prolonged period of uncertainty in the markets? Investing through inflationary periods is tricky business, to say the least. We're $35 trillion in debt, with inevitable acceleration of that debt burden. We're on the brink of a third world war. People all over the world are experiencing endemic inflation and the broken incentives that leads them to. You need to ask yourself how we got here, and why has everything gotten so dang expensive? Once you can answer these questions, you'll have clarity on the problem and on the probable solution. A once-in-a-species opportunity to own a fixed percentage of everything in the world. But before we do that, I want to introduce our sponsors, Stampseed, the Orange Pill app, and Swan. Our partners are businesses and people that we respect, and our products that we at Bit Intelligence personally use. You're watching 21 Voices.
If I look at the broader finance world, there are two things that really are huge alarm bells that should be ringing in every investor's head at the moment. Larry Fink coming out and saying that it's a safe haven asset, and Mohammed El-Arian, the ex-head of PIMCO and the CIO of Alliance Bernstein, saying that this is Bitcoin represents a flight to quality. That to me is even bigger than Jeff Bezos buying Bitcoin. If you hear those two things and you start to put pieces together to think, oh my goodness, the Overton window for Bitcoin has shifted away from being an asset that is a risk to put in your portfolio to now being Bitcoin is a risk not to have in your portfolio. So there's a complete paradigm shift that we're witnessing in real time. Bitcoiners are probably so far down the track that they've considered all of these things, and we get to watch the iterations and the learnings that everyone has who gets a Bitcoin, because it's a very predictable path. The more you learn about Bitcoin, the more you know, the more you buy. So it only makes sense that they start there and then they continue down that road logically till the end point, which is a Michael Saylor type, hey, I've got to sell everything to buy more Bitcoin. So I look at this and think that's the logical conclusion to what we're seeing now, which as Bitcoiners who have gone down that rabbit hole, we know what's in store for them. So it's very easy to predict what their behavior is going to be. If you trust these leaders, these entrepreneurs, these billionaires, and you know what the playbook is, because any Bitcoiner can tell you, get motivated to emulate what they're doing. And this is where, when it comes to a weighting in a portfolio, my ultimate, advice is you do you. And this isn't for anyone, but I look at it on a scale that, you've got the very poor and the very wealthy. If you have nothing, you should probably put 100% into Bitcoin because you don't have a lot to lose. If you're very wealthy, you should put practically all of your money into Bitcoin because even if you lose 90% of it, you're still going to be fine. However, if you're in the middle, you're probably not going to put everything into it. You might put 50% into it. So we have a spectrum of investment portfolio allocation. And rather than, looking at your risk profile, I actually think it's probably better to look at your how wealthy you are. To me, the models I find helpful because it generates thought and interest and attention on Bitcoin. So stock to flow, power law, anything else I think is a fun, intellectual pursuit to think about, well, what can happen with Bitcoin? I think it comes down to getting Bitcoin, getting comfortable with it, and then settling in for the ride because whatever will be, will be. I think Saylor said it best that it's going up forever, Laura. So it's just a matter of time. So get set in that position, get comfy with it, and then settle in for the ride because we know the direction's certain, I just don't know the timing of it. And this is where, over a long enough time frame, I think it does go up forever. So I think at some point in time, all of those models are going to break to the upside. And this is where, I find the intellectual pursuit of those models a little bit frivolous, but at the same time, great for engaging new users into Bitcoin who would otherwise never be interested in it. Unless you're selling for personal reasons like, the removal of debt or, rainy day fund or a home purchase or something of a personal nature, I think selling down Bitcoin and trying to pick those peaks and troughs is going to be very dangerous. And for anyone who's contemplating it, I'd say make sure you keep a large percentage of your stack in, because what happens if it doesn't do what you think it's going to do, because this cycle's different? What happens if we're at the FOMO part of the stock to FOMO chart where it just starts running away and up like that? I look at this and think there's a lot of risk involved in doing that. And arguably, the biggest Bitcoin haters in the world, I think, are the people who once had Bitcoin. The no-coiners are a different type of hate. It's a hate of ignorance because they don't understand what they're looking at because they've done no work on it. It doesn't make sense in their worldview, but that's okay. I give them a pass on that as being intellectually lazy and, they haven't done any work. But for the people who have bought Bitcoin and they bought at $3, they sold at $300, they walked away with 100x and thought they were geniuses, only to miss out on the next 100x increase, they're the ones who are really salty about Bitcoin and are death riding it to go to zero. And it's like, chances are this thing's never going back to zero again. This will just run away off into the distance. And it's only the ego and lack of humility stopping you from just buying and getting back on the train. But people want to be right, and they get, stuck in their ways when it comes to the conviction of a position that they take.
Please bear with us for a quick message from our sponsors. These videos take a lot of time to make, and we've partnered with brands we trust like Stampseed and the Orange Pill app in order to get the funding we need to bring you these videos every week. Don't store your Bitcoin in cold storage without stamping your seed phrase on an indestructible titanium plate. Stampseed is fireproof, rust-proof, impact-proof, and easy to hide. It has no loose parts and will give you ultimate peace of mind that your Bitcoin is safe and sound for the long term. Click the link in the description below for 15% off your stamping kit. When I finally got Bitcoin, it hit me like a lightning bolt. It was the currency of the future, the only money that truly mattered. But there was a problem. I didn't know anyone else that thought like me. That is until I discovered the Orange Pill app. Suddenly, I was connected with a network of like-minded Bitcoin enthusiasts right in my own city. The Orange Pill app is more than just a social network. It's a community of passionate individuals determined to change the world, one Satoshi at a time. This series is brought to you by Swan and created by Bit Intelligence. Remember to like this video and subscribe to both our channels for more videos like this every week. Thanks for watching.
When we're talking to clients, what we see is the ability to access pension money. And that would be the first place I start, because for two reasons. Firstly, most people are struggling to put food on the table at the moment. The pension money represents a non-household item, so they don't have to worry about budgeting and cash flow to account for it. It's in the never account of a pension system. But in the US, you're very fortunate that you can have self-custody Bitcoin in the form of an IRA. You can set that up with a number of different companies, And I look at that and I think there's a big pot of capital usually sitting there just waiting to be invested into Bitcoin. Now, this isn't investment advice. I don't get into that. But if you're looking for pools of capital to buy more Bitcoin, that is the first place I'd look to. Have a look at your 401k, have a look at your pension, or if you're in Australia, look at your superannuation, figure out where that is, and then figure out how can you buy more Bitcoin with that. In the US, it's basically an IRA, self-directed IRA. You can self-custody that Bitcoin. In Australia, there's a similar structure, so you can achieve that. Sadly, there's not that option available in the UK or Europe, but I'm sure they'll have some innovation in that capacity that will allow for that in the near future. But that right there, there's a whole host of capital that's sitting there in a pension system that's meant to be for your retirement. And we've just talked about the inherent risks with the existing financial system that we've got there. And do you want to leave a pool of capital sitting in that, subject to the risks that are only going to compound into the future with that existing financial system? Or do you want to put that into Bitcoin? Now, I can't tell anyone what to do, but I can speak for myself, and I know where I want my money or my exposure. Now, I'd much rather exposure Bitcoin than the other. You don't have to be all in, is what I'd say. You can take a part of it and put that in. I'd urge you to understand what are the risks inherent with the existing financial system, and on a long enough time frame, I expect us to have a blow up in that. So I look at, you're 24, I'm 20 years older. You've got 40 years in the TradFi system before you can access your pension money. I've got 20 years in my system before I can access my money. Now, just on a time variation, I've got less risk than you do. Now, I think over 20 years, I have a real problem with accessing any of that money, because in the next 20 years, I think the governments are going to extend the working age. So rather than 65, they'll extend that out to 80. So I might not even be able to access that money. And there's a high likelihood that we'll be able to, the government will have us die before we can actually access it. So what does that mean? At the moment, the average retirement age, 20 years ago was closer to 56. And now it's over 70. And at the same time, they're pushing the retirement age back or up in age. At the same time, our life expectancy is coming down. They never want you to have the pension. That's the whole thing about it. So they want you to put money into this savings account that you're never going to touch. And it's like, well, that's all good and well, but what if I actually live to that age and then want to access it? They're going to inflate it away and effectively drive it to zero, so it's worth nothing anyway. And I look at that in contrast to Bitcoin. I've got a pretty firm belief of what's going to happen over the next 20 to 40 years with the value of Bitcoin relative to the existing financial system. The government calculations that they give us in Australia, and they're the actuarial tables that are basically globally acceptable. So you can apply it to the US, UK, Western Europe, Australia. It's all roughly the same. As a 45-year-old, in my pension, if I want to have the money that I need to live on comfortably, I need to have, based on the assumed growth rates of the standard investments, I need to have $1 million in my account today. And that $1 million over the next 20 years is expected to grow to $3 million by the time I retire. Now, on $3 million in retirement, I can look forward to a $100 a week budget in real terms today for groceries. Now, I can tell you now, there's no way in hell I can live on $100, let alone feed my family on $100. So all of these assumptions, and this is the problem, the government is giving us assumptions that no one checks. It's all trusting, no verification. And I look at this and I think, well, if people understood the assumptions that they made, they'd never put a dollar into the investments that they're offering in this capacity in the financial system that we've got. You really end up with having a choice. Do you want to be guaranteed to be poor in retirement and live a subsistence life? Or do you want to risk it with a chance on Bitcoin? Now, to me, it's akin to, do you want to live on your knees or die on your feet? I would much prefer the optionality that comes with dying on my feet than living on my knees. And this is, anyone who's got a pension fund really needs to think about that and what they want to do, because, and I just want to sort of put this into a storied context. Can you imagine working 40 plus years of your life to get to retirement, to then realise, I now get to live on Maggi noodles for breakfast, lunch and dinner? That's the only thing I can afford? Invariably, you are required to work for the rest of your life until you die, because that is not going to provide what you need. And that's what they've done to the system, because they've fundamentally broken it. And that's the hard thing for anyone who's not in Bitcoin to really understand, the certainty that's given with Bitcoin versus the variability and volatility with the outside system.
It's clear that the financial world is undergoing a seismic shift, and Bitcoin is at the center of it. We've seen how major players in finance are no longer treating Bitcoin as a risk to their portfolios, but rather as a risk not to have it in them. The question is no longer if Bitcoin will play a role in the future of wealth, but how big that role will be. But where does that leave you? Are you willing to trust the current financial system, knowing its flaws and growing instability? Do you still believe it's necessary to go into massive debt in order to buy that dream house you so desperately want one day? You're just hustling, always trying to make more money and leverage yourself because that's the way, right? You got to make sure to have a nice diversified portfolio of real estate, dividend stocks, index funds, and ETFs, right? If this sounds like you, then relax. All this nonsense is draining your energy and time. It's simple. You don't need to do all that. Don't become an investor. Leave that to Wall Street. Just change your money. In Bitcoin, we provide value to others, spend less than we earn, and save in Bitcoin. It's that simple. Don't be trapped by fiat gains. They're complicated and risky, despite what they might tell you. Our game is simple. We stack sats to protect our future, our family, our community, and our health. If you want to learn more about how to use Bitcoin to your advantage and win the game of life, watch this video with BTC Sessions here. Thanks for watching.